Good day. My name is Sidnaya. I'm from the Centre of Higher Education Quality, Monash University, Australia. And today my talk or my session is actually going to be on quality assurance in higher education. Just to give you some kind of background, I've been invited by the Commissioner of Higher Education in Gujarat to actually give advice on a center, the development of a center of higher education quality, so that there can be a coordination and a systematic implementation of the quality movement within Gujarat itself. So what I'm actually going to do is, before I actually get into my topic proper, is just to give you an overview in terms of what I'm going to cover today. If you look from the overhead that's in front of you, what I want to do is introduce myself and where I come from, and then get into the aspects of what is quality and why is quality really an important tool in the higher education system, elements of in quality, and touch upon what a quality audit and why is it necessary that you go through a process of quality audits itself. Now, Monash University, as you can see from the overhead in front of you again, is that it's a public university that was developed in 1958, a pretty new university itself, where I come from. It has 55,000 students in it, with more than representing 130 countries. Now, 55,000 students itself makes us the biggest university in Australia, with 6,000 staff at the university. About nearly 3,000 are actually teaching staff alone. Now, we are a member of the prestigious group of 8. In other words, we are a research-intensive university. So if you're thinking of research, Monash is one of the universities which is very, very strong in research. We have got 8 campuses, 6 in Australia, 1 in Malaysia, and 1 in South Africa. And we've got a center in Italy as well. If you want to take a look at this thing in terms of what the center does, the center leads, advises, and supports the development of quality assurance across the whole of university. Now think about it. We've got 6 campuses in Australia, 2 overseas. We've got a center in Italy itself. So we are responsible to looking after quality in every area, whether it's education, research, or research training, or whether it's engagement, or whether it's even the support of administration within that within the university or that campus. But keep that in mind, and let's go back to the topic in terms of why we are big and what the center has to do. We offer about nearly 800 different courses, but 5,000 subjects are offered each semester. And with those 55,000 students in 10 faculties, and approximately with 6,000 staff, with 75 research centers, and the partnerships we have in Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong. We also have a center in Bombay with IIT. So we are responsible for the quality of all of that's happening and ensuring that the standards are there. In other words, a Monash degree is a degree no matter where you do it, and whether you do it in Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong, India, it's all the same degree with the same standards. Now let's get into the topic proper. Now, if you look at the overhead itself, I've got the heading saying, what is quality? Now, quality itself is a very, very interesting word, but there are numerous definitions of quality. Let me just give you some of the top definitions. Quality as excellence. In other words, we are used to a concept where quality is the best. All right, we can judge excellence, but the judgment of excellence itself is very, very subjective. What is excellence? How do you measure excellence? So if it's subjective by itself, then how would you actually put that in a university context to try and measure that? The second interesting word on the overhead is, as I'm saying, which you'll be seeing, is that quality as 0 errors. Now, I think you're very used to 0 errors. In other words, you're not allowed to make any errors. There's a punitive connotation to it. In other words, 0 errors is simply like a factory line. When you make a mistake, you want to remove the items that are not functioning properly. That is what 0 errors is. That is where the term quality control comes from. Can we use this in higher education? Think about this. We are as a higher education institution, you are actually learning. All right. In other words, there is no way that there are no errors that's happening. We are all human, therefore there will be a tendency to make some kind of errors, and we must have the ability to improve. So zero error concept can't actually apply to a higher education environment. The next one, if you look at the screen again, is the third kind of definition, where it's a minimum standards. Minimum standards, we all understand, this is what we need to reach, a certain plateau. That's fine. But if you look at the minimum standard concept, to get to that minimum standard, you need to have processes in place. So you can't actually just measure the minimum standard, you have to actually make sure that the processes are correct. So that particular component needs to be measured. So not necessarily a very good model for quality in the higher education. The next concept of quality and the definition I'd like to touch upon is fitness for purpose. Now, fitness for purpose simply means there's a variety. Each university is different. All right, each university's got a different mission or a different different objectives. In Gujarat, for example, there are universities or colleges with different regions, coastal region, rural regions. You have to actually take that into considerations. In other words, what fitness for purpose is look at us for what we are doing, judge us for what we are doing and what our objectives are. Don't compare us in such a way that, if you do not know what's happening here, it's not the same thing happening in another place. But compared to that, there is another definition of quality, which is fitness of purpose, which means it is a gold standard. You're measuring every university, every college on the same plateau, regardless of what's happening in that environment. Now, fitness of purpose, when applied, has to be applied in such a way if all conditions are the same. If all conditions are not the same, fitness for purpose is very hard to apply in a university or higher education context. Now, the next one I like to touch upon is why has it become important, the quality agenda itself. Look at the overhead. Let's touch on the first point. Massive growth in higher education internationally. As you know, which is within Gujarat, within India itself, the demand for higher education is great. There is the number of students moving out of India and actually going into other countries. All right, what has happened is the higher education system around the world is now a global market. All right, there is an influence of international students coming in from every single area for nearly every single offering around the world. But better still in that is that the other point actually touches upon the massification point, which is the influence of information technology in the delivery of education. As you're seeing me right now, I'm not in a classroom, and neither are you, but you're actually seeing me actually deliver this lecture that actually goes around. Information technology is now playing a critical factor in education, which simply means you don't have to have the student present, and yet you have hundreds of students actually registered and actually doing that particular course. We need to, in other words, look at that standard and look at the information that's going across when you're using information technology. International education. What has happened in internationalization of education? What's happened is that there's an emergence of new providers. In other words, new people are coming in, setting up as a college, as a university. If they're going to be setting up, we have to ensure that quality is important. In other words, if they are giving a degree, they're giving a degree that is clearly the same standard right across. So we've got to keep an eye on the new providers. There's also the greater focus on good management. Now, one of the most important things we have to do is ensure that management keeps up and changes things as and when required. So focus on good management is critical, and that's why one of the factors that quality actually zooms into. Now, with the result of quality becoming globally important, there is a development of numerous quality agencies. Just give you an example. There's the Australian Universities Quality Agency in Australia, the Higher Education Quality Commission in South Africa, the Malaysian Qualification Agency in Malaysia, And then you got NAC in India. Clearly, all these agencies are there to ensure that your degrees that are given are of a certain standard. And in other words, you want to protect your reputation as an institution. You want to protect your reputation as a country or and a state and a country that you're giving out standards, a standard degree right across. And clearly, one of the most important reasons why quality has to be there is that you, as a consumer, if you're the student, you have to basically be satisfied that the degree that you're getting, all right, means something. In other words, they are standards. It is recognized in your state, in your country, and globally. And last but not least, most of the colleges, most of the universities are funded by governments. So if they're funded, the taxpayers' money is well spent. In other words, are you maintaining, are you providing the services that you're supposed to under the funding schemes? Now, let me give you an example of the approach to quality. In quality, one of the things you need to understand is that but all of us need to define or be able to define or make it a definition of a quality, the concept of quality, so you understand what we are talking about. To be systematic right across a state. What is quality in higher education? What is quality in higher education in Gujarat is an understanding that you must have. But let's approach it, instead of me trying to define what quality in higher education in Gujarat is all about, let me get you to how we actually define quality at Monash University. We've got a document which is actually a policy document which says quality at Monash values and principles. This specific document tells all the employers, all those who are employed at the university, and all those students what quality is at our institution. It is made up of 7 core values, and if you look at your overhead, it's right now. The first one, as we have mentioned, is fitness for purpose. In other words, judge us for what we are doing. Now, interestingly enough, this fitness for purpose applies at every single level, from the top management right down to you as the individual. So in other words, what are you? What's your job? Am I a lecturer? And what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to do teaching? I'm supposed to do research. I'm supposed to be engaged with the wider community, the research and teaching community, as well as the community within your area. This is what I'm going to be judged on. That's fitness for purpose. The second one is the most important, which I think, which is quality is everyone's business. There is no way that quality can be of success unless you yourself are involved. So everyone in your organization must be part of the quality movement. All right. If you stand aside and say, I'm not doing anything, the organization itself will have patchy quality. So you are part and parcel responsible for quality. You as a individual, you as a professional must clearly have this inbound. In other words, in yourself, that you are, everything you do, you're trying to do the best you can. We are a learning organization. Now I'm only going to hit this 3, and the rest are, I think, pretty clear in itself. We are a learning organization. In other words, let's learn from each other. Let's learn what are the good practices. Let's try and improve. That's what a learning organization in this context simply means. If you look at the last line of my slide, it says the quality cycle is based on a certain system. All right, and my next slide tells you what the system is. The system is what we call the quality cycle. Now, this is available in literature right across the quality literature. So if you take a look at it, it has plan, act, evaluate, improve. 4 components that will ensure that your quality within your institution and even you as an individual will be actually progressing in the right direction. So let me just touch upon the first one. And you look at the slide, plan. Plan is clearly to look at all the planning at all levels of the university, or whether it's state, the university, the colleges. All right. What we're trying to do is you have to set a plan before you can actually progress. All right. And the act is what do you do to put this plan in place. All right. In other words, what are the intentional activities that you do to meet the objectives that you have set? Now, if you look at the overhead, the next overhead, this is the system we have employed. You look at the pyramid structure, right? It actually shrinks at the top. Of course, it's a pyramid. That's why it shrinks in the top. If you look at the bottom, it is to do with annual plans, the budget plans, the faculty plans, the operational plans. And if you look at the left of your screen, you get a time frame, 1 to 3 years, which goes up to 20 years. In other words, the bottom of the pyramid are the short-term goals or the short-term plans, and the top of the pyramid are the long-term plans of the institution. And every single plan on the pyramid from bottom up has to end up with the aim of getting the university, in this case, in the direction it wants to be in 2025. So every level of planning has to finally simply cascade into the final point of your strategic direction. All right, I'd like to go into the next one. We did plan, we did act. The next component is evaluation or evaluate. There are two components in evaluate. Now, before I touch on the two components, let me emphasize this is a very, very important part of your quality cycle. If you got a plan and you acted on your plans, the question that should be in your head right now is, how would you know that what you have done actually was good? How would you actually get some kind of feedback? How would you evaluate it? How would you then try and put in things or changes? So the evaluation component has to be that whatever you do, you have to try and evaluate it. So the two components. Monitor is simply a short and medium term activity, mainly for development of formative purposes. Good example is a teacher evaluation. Take a teacher evaluation in terms of your student giving you feedback. When your students give you feedback, you take that information, you look at it, and you then put in changes or incorporate or put an action plan. That's monitor. You're looking at the data that's coming in on a regular basis. A review is a longer term approach. In other words, what we're trying to say is that a review is where all the data is available. You were looking at, for example, the teacher evaluation. You were looking at the research data. You were looking at things like retention rates, grade distribution. In other words, it's a time when we look at the overall picture, maybe of the department, not the individual lecturer itself, but of the whole department, of the whole faculty as a unit. So it's a powerful tool when you actually break down evaluation, monitor when you're doing it for formative purposes, and then you're looking at a longer review to get the total picture on what's happening in your organization or in your organizational unit, you may say. Now, I'm still touching upon feedback. Feedback is where the evaluation is. Why is it critical in the quality movement, or why do you need to actually consider this? First of all, it gives you a diagnostic feedback in terms of to faculties and administration about teaching, for example, or services that you're providing. But let me just try to keep on the example of teaching, which is much more easier or much more practical in the sense for explanation. All right. What will happen is you get this kind of feedback that gives you information for development and improvement. The other thing that happens on feedback is that it gives you research data. It gives you empirical evidence. All right, on how, on what, and what aspects you have to look at in terms of improvements. That's the second point. It also is used in many universities in higher education as a teaching effectiveness tool. In other words, for administrative decision making, for performance management. And interestingly enough, our university uses it for promotion. So if you want to go for promotion, demonstrate to us that you are a good teacher. And here is independent evidence that actually tells us, all right, given by your audience, which are students, all right, about your performance as a teacher. Now, that's only one of the items. You got other things you can put in. You got peer reviews and all that comes in anyway. We also have the ability at our university to give this information to current and potential students. In other words, a current or potential student can actually review or view such feedback. Let me explain this a bit more clearly. Our university has something known as subject evaluation. All right. Every subject is evaluated. Now, this information is available on our website. That simply means you as a student, current student, after filling up a survey, will be able to see what your whole class has said about that subject. So you will know whether you stand alone or you're with the rest of the class in terms of your opinion of that class. Your students that are coming in later next year or the next semester can actually take a look at that class and see how it performed. The last one, which is very interesting, and actually it's what many universities are heading towards to, is putting the quality of the units, the courses, everything, and tied into funding. A good example in this one is the units. Units here are subjects, and the subjects, what happens is if you perform well, you get extra funding to do research. You get extra funding to go for conferences. If you do badly, if you're getting X amount of money from the university, that's where it stands. There is no incentive. This is an incentive which actually says I get extra money to do further research and further work in my field. In research itself, in feedback itself, one of the things that you always face, if you look at the overhead, this is very, very important, because one of the things that you always face is that academics will face or say is that students lack the wisdom and experience to evaluate the effectiveness of unit and course and the teacher. In other words, what they're saying is the students have no idea what they're talking about. But let me put it this way: who is the best judge to judge whether the information that is going across when you're in a class, you're standing in front of a class, you are delivering your lecture? Who is the best to tell you whether you actually presented that in a clear manner? All right, whether they actually understood? It's the audience. Just the same thing here. You are the audience who can tell me whether it's actually very clear what this slide, for example, is telling you. Now, simply put, they have the wisdom, they have the ability to tell you exactly what kind of teacher you are. All right, and if you look at the overhead itself, there are numerous research. So you got 40 years of research that support this. The second one, which you actually take a look at it, the second finding on the overhead, if you take a look at it, is an assertion by many, and now it's actually coming down, is that student evaluation is just a popularity contest. All right. Again, lots and lots of research which shows this is not true. But let me give you a practical example. I had a colleague who did a teacher evaluation. All right. And he said it was not that great a teacher evaluation, but it was all right. So what he did was he set an easy test the next time around in the next semester, the same class, because they go through 2 semesters with him. And he set a real easy test. He did the teaching evaluation right after the easy test, and before that he gave the test back. Everybody passed, but he obtained an identical result, almost identical result in his teacher evaluation. In other words, students have the ability who already know what kind of teacher you are. The test has nothing to do with it. All right. Other factors generally found to unrelated student ratings, all right, which include class size, teacher characteristics, student characteristics. Teacher characteristics like gender, age, and teaching experience have nothing to do with your rating, what students give you. It's what you do in front of a class. The other point on class size is that there's always it is, let's be practical, there is some difficulties always associated with teaching in a large class because the interaction between student and teacher is less. But let me just give you a good example of a class in the US which has 1,500 students registered in it. It's a physics class, right? And that class, that particular teacher has the highest teacher evaluation, all right, within the institution, one of the highest, all right, which is fascinating. That teacher's class, all right, when registration starts, 1,500 students. If you're not the first 1,500 students, you are not in, all right? So it tells us class size is not necessarily an impeding factor. It is how and what you do in front of the class that makes a good teacher. What in short it tells us is that there's enough research to say you need to evaluate, you need to provide feedback, regardless whether in your classroom, whether the services you provide, or whether in administration itself. What the research shows is that the stakeholders can provide good information for you to go on to the next level, which is the improvement phase. Now, before I get into improvement, let me just show you on the overhead itself what we do in terms of evaluation. We have one of the most structured evaluations of feedback systems in Australia, in an Australian university. This was actually endorsed when we went through an audit process. If you look at it at the institutional level, we have a teacher evaluation, we got a subject evaluation. The Monash experience questionnaire is what's known as a current student experience. We want to know what you're facing as you're going through. Is it good experience, a bad experience? A bad experience, can we change it? And the support experience is what support is provided to students during their studies. Can we actually improve that kind of feedback? Of course, when we're getting students to give feedback, we also must give staff the opportunity to give feedback to their heads. So we got a head of school, head of department or school survey. In other words, your staff fill up this survey to give information to your heads or your supervisors so they can become better supervisors. Then we got research supervision survey. Simply means as a research student, can you tell us whether your research experience is great, whether your supervisor is providing the right support. And then we measure a lot of other things. If you live in residence here, we call them hostels. We provide the students to give feedback on the hostel living, on the facilities that are provided at the hostels. And then we have what's known as a learning and growth. In other words, if I am the employee, what do I need to become a better employee? Feedback, anonymous feedback, confidential feedback, so it is feedback that can be used and which is accurate. And finally, at the national level, once a student finishes the university studies and he goes out, we want him or her to give feedback on the experience they had at the university. So 4 months after graduation, what we do is we get students to fill up a survey, come back and basically tell us what they thought of the degree. Was it actually worth it? Was it actually useful in your workplace? The graduate destination survey gives us, the university, gives us the state and the country information on whether you got employed, where you're employed, what's your salary scale, alright, whether you went on to further studies. In other words, gives us information on employability of our graduates, gives us ability to actually look at whether the degrees are valid. So these are some things that actually provide us information for change. And finally, in our unit, because feedback is so important, we develop other feedback information or feedback tools so that units or organizational units can concentrate on certain aspects if they want to try and get more information for change. What's the breadth of impact on all this kind of information being collected? Every stakeholder is involved in the process. Alright, from the university students, from the university staff, and we also, the external stakeholders, we also collect feedback from employers as well. Every aspect is covered. We produce a variety of reports so that we can understand what is happening, what the information is telling us. And one of the things we provide is not only to students, but we provide to other stakeholders the ability to view the results. If you gave us feedback, you want to know what the feedback has been saying. In other words, don't just collect the information and file it somewhere. Share it with your audience, and therefore your audience know where the strong points are and where the weak points are. Now let me just touch upon the unit subject evaluation so you have an idea. The subject evaluation had 4 drivers to it, but let me put it this way, like any organization, what we found out is we had a system in place to get feedback on subjects, and what we had was that what we found out was that when we did a review of ourselves is that it was very patchy. So we went in and did a systematic student evaluation right across. Now the question that you always have to ask is, when you put in such evaluation of feedback, how do you know things are working? Now let me just show you something here. Look at this graph which appears in front of you. This is the unit or subject evaluation performance trend over 3 years. On the left hand side, you see graphs which have 5 to 4, 4 to 5, which in other words, you're looking at a questionnaire which measures 5 is the maximum and 1 as the minimum. So 1 is the worst performer and 5 is maximum. So it's a 5-point Likert scale. In 2005, when we started, roughly 32% of the units were getting a score of 4 and above. And if you look at the bottom end of that graph, 8.2% of those units that were actually evaluated were at the bottom end. But over the years, if you look at the left-hand side, we have gone from 32% to nearly 50% of units scoring 4 and above. And at the bottom end, we have gone down to 5%. That is huge difference. In other words, what it's telling us is that as a university, we are heading in the right direction. We are going for excellence, or we will say we are going for the best. All right. And what it tells us, the bottom end, those who are not performing that well are actually moving in the right direction by shifting from, let's say, from the lower end to the next level, and then the next level is moving up. The idea here is, are we moving up in the right direction? The answer is yes. But it doesn't happen by just collecting data. Something is happening in the background. There is an improvement phase. In other words, people are being engaged. People are engaged with the data. They're seeing what is wrong and putting in steps for changes. Let me just tell you something about response rate. They always say students don't fill up surveys. Here it is. When we started in this unit, we are at 29%, roughly about 30%. We are right now hovering at 50%. What this data suggests is that students and your stakeholders will give feedback if they know that you are actually paying attention to what's being said and putting some actions in place. And just to give you some kind of numbers, as I said, we actually evaluate roughly about 7,000 units a year. In other words, when you think about 50% of the units are in the top, scoring 4 and above, you're talking about nearly 3,500 units up there. And then in the bottom end, we're talking about 5%. In other words, that's about 350 units. That's not too bad. 350 units compared to 7,000 units. We are working on it. But let's be very practical. There is no way we're going to shift everything else unit up there, but we are trying our best to actually find what the issues are and trying to correct them. These, if you look at overheads, this is what you can see if you get onto the Monash website, or the students will see. It tells us the unit, tells us what faculty, tells us the number of students enrolled or overall response, and the number of students who complete the questionnaire. This is the information or the reports that are generated once the student fills up a survey. And you get a graphical representation of the response scale, a mean and standard deviation. So if you look at this particular response for this particular unit on the item, the learning objectives as unit were made clear to me. Around 55% of the students say, yes, I agree. Another additional 14% actually tell us, yes, I strongly agree. In other words, nearly 68 to 70% of the students are actually very sure that what's happening in class, I understand it. And you look at the mean, it's very close to a 4. Right. Improve is the next phase of any effective quality cycle. You've got that feedback. You plan, you acted, you evaluated, you're looking at the result. Now you have to put in an action plan to basically put changes in. All right. In other words, act on your data, not file it away. The thing which I've been mentioning over and over again is closing the loop. And that's when you say, I've collected this data, I'm putting this feedback information on the website or sharing with the stakeholders, but I'm also getting back and saying, as a result of your feedback, I am going to do the following. These are the following changes, whether it's at the the subject level, whether it's at the department level, whether it's at the college level, whether it's a university level, or whether it's state level. This is what closing of the loop is. Look at the slides, next slide, and if you see strategies for closing the loop. There are many easy ways, and which is very cost efficient, you may say. The first one is, as an individual, you can provide verbal reports back to your class on your teaching evaluation, or even in what's happening at your college. All right, you can involve student representatives and explain to them or give them information so they can actually get to the students. All right, the other one is you can send an email. If you got email availability, you can email all your students and say, if you go to this website or go to here, you can get the results, all right, of what happened in the evaluation. This is what we are doing. And finally, like what we have decided is put it on the web. All right, put it on the web so students in your university can take a look at it as well. All the university, so all the students can take a look at it. Right. I'd like to touch upon the last part on. I've been asked this question again and again. What is a quality audit? All right. Very simplistically put, the audit is to ensure the university, the college, all right, is meeting its objectives. In other words, if you have set objectives, how are you doing it? Demonstrate to us and show us the evidence, and clearly what steps are you taking from the monitoring of these objectives, how you achieve them, to improving its performance and what you have done. But it's all based on evidence. All right, so you can't demonstrate that you have achieved an objective unless you got the evidence to support it. Just to give you an idea on how when we go through our audits, the university submits an extensive self-review document. In other words, we call it the portfolio. We've got an audit panel which is made up of independent representation. In other words, nobody at the university is on it, but other university representation is there. The representatives are from the Australian University's Quality Agency and international members make that particular panel. The report is actually a public report. All right. In other words, when we actually go through a process of getting audited, the audit report is public. There are recommendations, affirmations, and commendations. So you as a student, you as a member of the public, can take a look at the audit report, all right, by yourself and actually come down to conclusions yourself. But better still in this whole process is that the organizations, the higher education industry is held responsible. When we do an audit, we ask, the agency will ask you for a report, which is known as a progress report, 18 months after the report is out, to show and demonstrate and report back all those recommendations, what steps you have taken. So you as a member of that university, whether you're staff or student, can go back and take a look whether management or whether faculty or whether individuals have taken action as a result of those recommendations. In other words, accountability. Here is where the accountability really comes into play when reports are public and what's happening is also public. Here's an idea, just you look at the overhead. We have 3 volumes when we produce. So because we are a large university and we got numerous campuses and we have to satisfy quality agencies in different countries, our volumes were done in terms of the whole university, the campus in Malaysia and the campus in South Africa. We believe that when you do a portfolio or a review, the document that you make should be an inclusive approach. In other words, everybody in the university or the college should be involved or given the opportunity to give feedback on it. We asked for requests from comments from staff and students once we had a draft of the portfolio, and interestingly enough, there were over 100 submissions, but we made sure that we went out and talked to 1,000 people. Now there's 6,000 staff members. We went and talked to 1,000. So that is really something else. All right, and we put up a website where all the things that we collected, whatever feedback we have, is on the website, or was on the website anyway, and for everyone to take a look at it during the process of this audit. Now, what did it mean for Monash in terms of audit? Well, let me put it very simplistically. Instead of just looking through this thing, we interviewed nearly 1,000, roughly about 800 people in 13 days. That's fantastic, but we had to do it. And we also jumped around campuses and campuses. In other words, when we do an audit, we audit every aspect, every campus. We actually turned up, the audit panel actually turned up on the campus to just investigate even one aspect on that campus. So in other words, physical presence would give them information in terms of facilities that's available on that campus. Our portfolio looked at every single area of the university. It gave us the institutional context, the quality approach at the university, all right, the people that work there, the education area. Educations mean the degrees that have been granted, the research training, the research engagement, our international focus, because we say we're an international university, and last but not least, one of the most important is the support service and infrastructure that's available for students, so that they can so that we can deliver the standards and the courses as we say we are supposed to be doing. But interestingly enough, if you look at it, we decided this is our quality cycle: plan, act, evaluate, improve. If you look at it, every single chapter we wrote was based on the cycle. But let me put it in very practical sense. When I do a teaching portfolio on myself, I actually use the quality cycle. I start off as what my plans were for this year. How did I act upon them? How did I evaluate whether the plans actually worked? All right, and then my improvement. In those sectors, when I actually put it in, you get a total picture of me as an individual when I go for my performance review. Just to help you out, every audit is an experience itself, and every time an institution goes through an audit, there's a fear factor, let's put it, because you're not sure what's going to happen. So we make sure that we have what's known as a mock audit. We help staff to understand what's going to happen at a real audit, so that they are not frightened, and they are pretty free to give their opinions. A mock audit, when we did it, we had our senior deputy vice chancellor, our pro vice chancellor of quality chair it, and senior faculty member on it, and the director of quality. So these four went on all our campuses and interviewed actually about 1,000 people as well. Ideas. Here is our report, just to give you an idea. We had 16 commendations of good practice, second affirmations of areas the university is working to improve. So we identified areas, and the independent group panel that came in and said, good, we noticed those are areas that you need to actually start to do some work, but you already started that work. So we gave you some affirmations on that. And finally, 10 recommendations for improvement. Generally, a very positive report, which was very, very good, because these kind of audits also come up with what they call more negative reports. And there are some universities which get negative reports, which means get your act together. Finally, just to give you an idea on what the commendations were, here's one thing which I want to emphasize. If you look third from the top, which is highlighted, it says effective implementation of the quality cycle. What that tells us is that when the quality panel, when the review panel went and asked questions, everyone knew what the quality agenda, what the quality policy of the institution was. In other words, there were no variation on what the expectation of quality is at the institution. The second point, which is also very important, is that systematic implementation of a considerable suite of evaluation instruments. It tells us you have decided that your stakeholders are really important. You're very, very much committed to get feedback for improvement. Now, take a look at the last slide. This particular cycle, the quality cycle, plan, act, evaluate, and improve, is like a wheel. If you do this on a regular basis, go through this cycle, that wheel will be moving up that slope. You see that wedge at the bottom, right, on your left hand side? That wedge should move up slowly or creep up in the right direction. Remember, you will stagnate. The probability is that you will stagnate somewhere along the way. The question that you have to ask in any quality agenda is that, are you satisfied achieving halfway up that, or is your aim to go further up? If your aim is to go further up, you should be looking at your processes and say, let's put in something different to see whether we can move up another notch. That's what quality is all about. Now, of course, there are questions and discussions, but instead of that, let me just get into a video I want to show you to try and summarize, or maybe put it in a much more realistic sense. You got quality is plan, you act, you evaluate, and you improve. All right. In other words, you're getting feedback, and you're getting to do something different or something in another way. But there is another component of all this, of quality. Plan, act, evaluate, improve means innovation. It means taking good practices from one place, maybe using it as is, or you actually adapt. All right? Adapt it to the best. In other words, you can actually take good practices, put your practice in, and therefore come up with a new and much more effective way of, in your classroom, it might be teaching. It might be an administrative service that you're doing. It might be research. So take a look at this video, which I think gives the flavor of what I talk about quality in terms of the best. All right, in terms of the way they've taken matters, they've blended it and improved it.
Do you do whatever you're doing professionally, or you have another job?
No, I'm a trainee lawyer, and I've been doing this. Yeah, I'm guilty. Thank you. No, but I used to do this when I was a kid, and I've been doing it in the evenings and on the weekends.
Okay, well, we're curious. Off you go.
Thank you very much.
Right. I hope that gives you a flavor that if you plan something, you act on it, you evaluate it in such a way to improve it, and then put the innovative approach in it, you actually get a quality product. All right. I hope this particular lecture has actually given you a flavor on why quality is an important agenda on anyone's table who is a professional, especially in the higher education sector. Thank you.